In the annals of political theater, some moments are mere footnotes, while others become legends. Forged in the heart of a city, they redefine the very soul of a nation. This is the story of one such moment when a president, armed with a deeply personal code, stood against the tide of a new, radical ideology, and in doing so, reminded America what it meant to be a friend. The air in the Trump Tower penthouse was thick with history, the city lights of Manhattan sprawling below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. President Donald Trump stood beside his son, Barron, the two of them silhouetted against the floor to ceiling glass. The boy was quiet, his height now nearly matching his father's, his presence a silent anchor in the storm of the presidency. Trump pointed a familiar finger towards the distant silhouette of the Statue of Liberty, a faint green torch in the haze. Your great-grandmother saw that when she came here from Scotland, he said, his voice softer than the world was used to hearing. And my father, he built for people who saw that light and wanted a piece of this city. He always said, Donald, you don't just build buildings. You build a welcome. This city, it's the world's handshake. You never, ever pull that hand away. It was a rare glimpse into the man behind the podium, a son of New York, fiercely protective of its unwritten code of strength and hospitality. This was his city, and its honor was his own. The lesson was about to be tested on the world stage. Down below, in the canyons of politics, the newly minted Democratic nominee for mayor, Zohran Mamdani, was making waves. Riding a surge of activist energy, Mamdani had made a stunning, audacious pledge. Setting a controversial international criminal court warrant, he declared that if the Prime Minister of Israel set foot in New York City for the upcoming UN General Assembly, his administration would arrest him. The statement was a lightning bolt, celebrated by his base as a stand for justice, but seen by others as a shocking breach of diplomatic protocol. The world watched, wondering if America's largest city was about to declare war on one of its closest allies. The news reached the White House, and the president's chief of staff, Arthur Vance, a stoic man who had seen crises come and go like Washington seasons, presented the options. Diplomatic statements, back channel pressures, a formal rebuke. Trump waved them all away. He wasn't thinking as a strategist, he was thinking as a New Yorker. He picked up the phone. The call was not to the State Department, but to his team at Trump Tower. The plan was simple, direct, and deeply personal. When the Israeli Prime Minister's plane touched down at JFK, he would not be met by protests or the threat of handcuffs. He would be met by a presidential motorcade. He would not be a fugitive in the city, he would be a guest of honor in the president's own home. The confrontation was a spectacle of pure political power. As Mamdani held a press conference on the steps of City Hall, flanked by cheering activists, the world's cameras split their screens. On one side, the mayoral nominee passionately decrying the Israeli leader. On the other, live footage from the gilded lobby of Trump Tower. The doors opened, and out walked President Trump, shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli Prime Minister. They stood before a forest of microphones, the gold TRUMP logo gleaming behind them. The president leaned in, his voice calm, but carrying the force of a battering ram. There's a debate about politics, he began, and that's fine. But there is no debate about honor. In my city and in my country, we welcome our friends. We stand by our allies. We do not threaten them on the world stage for cheap political points. This house, this city, and this nation will always be a safe harbor for the friends of the United States of America. He shook the Prime Minister's hand firmly, a silent gesture that roared louder than any speech. The moral victory was instant, decisive, and absolute. The firestorm was immediate and blinding. The internet erupted. Memes flooded social media. One depicted the Trump Tower lobby with a sign reading, "Real Hospitality." Another showed Trump as a bouncer, physically blocking a snarling caricature of Mamdani from the UN building. The phrase, the Trump doctrine of hospitality, began trending. News coverage was a dizzying kaleidoscope of praise and fury. Cable news panels devolved into shouting matches. Supporters hailed the president's move as a masterstroke of moral clarity, a defense of American sovereignty and loyalty. They saw a leader who acted from the gut, who understood that some principles were more important than politics. A leader who had single handedly saved the nation from a profound and humiliating embarrassment. But the backlash was just as fierce. Protesters, organized with furious speed, descended on Fifth Avenue. The chants were venomous, personal. They called the president a tyrant, a warmonger, a man who sided with power over people. Mamdani, seizing the narrative of resistance, called the president's action an imperial stunt, a slap in the face to international law and the will of the city's progressive movement. The media, eager for conflict, amplified the division, painting a picture of a nation at war with itself, with Trump Tower as its glittering, divisive epicenter. Privately, the firestorm took its toll. The victory, so clear and bright in the public eye, cast long shadows within the White House. One evening, Arthur Vance entered the Oval Office, his face grim. He placed a thin, crimson folder on the Resolute desk. It was labeled TRCOMS, Threat Communications. Inside were transcripts of the most vile and specific threats, unhinged emails, chilling voicemails left on the public comment line. Arthur didn't editorialize. It was a procedural part of the job, a grim accounting of the hatred the president's actions had unleashed. Trump flipped through a few pages, his jaw tight. He saw the words, the raw, violent rage aimed not just at him, but at his family. He pushed the folder aside. "Let them talk, Arthur," he said, his voice gravelly. "They're just proving my point." But the bravado was a shield. Later that night, alone, the weight was heavier. He found himself staring at the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, the leader who had borne the ultimate burden of a nation tearing itself apart. The exhaustion was bone deep. Was it worth it? This constant, grinding war of words, the endless vitriol, the poison seeping into the very fabric of the country. He thought of Barron, of the world his son was inheriting. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. The path of least resistance would have been so much easier. A simple statement, a quiet diplomatic maneuver. But then he remembered his father's words, the view from the penthouse, the promise of the city. He had not acted for politics. He had acted on principle. And principle, he knew, always came at a cost. The next morning, a surprising message arrived. It was a hand-delivered letter on personal stationery, the crest of which belonged to a former, staunchly Democratic mayor of New York City. This was a man who had been a ferocious critic of Trump, for decades, a pillar of the liberal establishment. Trump slit the envelope open, expecting more criticism, but the words inside were astonishing. "Mr. President," it began, "you and I will likely never agree on policy, but I was born in Brooklyn, and I love New York. What you did yesterday was not about politics. It was about the honor of our city. We do not threaten guests in our house. Period. On this, you were completely right, and you made this old Democrat proud of his hometown again. Well done." Trump read the letter twice. A slow smile spread across his face. He handed it to Arthur. "See," he said, a renewed strength in his voice. "Even my enemies know what's right." It was a private validation that meant more than 1,000 cheering rallies. It was proof that the principle he had fought for transcended the toxic tribalism of the day. That moment solidified his resolve. The private toll, the threats, the exhaustion, they were the price of leadership. The fight had not just been about a single diplomatic incident. It was about a fundamental question of national character. He had drawn a line in the sand, not between Republican and Democrat, but between hospitality and hostility, between loyalty and ideology. He had forced a conversation that the country desperately needed to have. Does a nation's character come from its power to punish or its willingness to protect? Is an ally a transactional partner to be discarded for political gain, or a friend to be sheltered in a storm? By choosing to act from a place of personal conviction, born from the lessons of his father and the pride of his city, he had given the American people a clear choice. He had won the public battle, endured the private cost, and in the end, reaffirmed a principle that was as old and as solid as the bedrock of Manhattan itself. You always stand by your friends. The ungracious host incident became more than a news cycle. It became a defining moment of his presidency. It was a lesson in how a single, decisive action, rooted in personal conviction, can cut through the noise and remind a nation of its core values. So, the question for us is this: in an age of performative politics, is there still a place for the unwritten codes of honor and loyalty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go behind the headlines.